So we know that there are various names of God in the Bible. But there is one special name, the essential holy name of God's essence, which is the four-letter tetragrammaton, spelled in the Hebrew with the Hebrew letters Yud, He, and Vav, He. And together these letters permute into three words, Haya, Hoveh, and Yihiyeh. Haya, he was. Hoveh, he is. Yihiyeh, he will be. So we know that this holy name of God is never pronounced as it is written. We don't pronounce God's holy four-letter name as it is written, even in prayer, even when we are reading the Bible. And during these times, when we come across God's name, we pronounce his name as Adonai. Now, that's not what it says, but that's how we read it. Adonai meaning the master. The only exception to this was in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem when it was standing. The Torah states in Deuteronomy chapter 12, in three different places there, chapter 12, verse 5, verse 11, verse 21, the Torah says, God, your Lord, will appoint a place for you to link his name there. There is a place where you're going to actually link God's name, meaning you'll express God's name in this place. So in general, we never pronounce God's name as it is written. The only exception was in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem, and that took place each day when the priest pronounced the priestly benediction, which is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. Right? May the Lord bless you and keep you, etc. So there, the holy name of God was pronounced. And then on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur, the high priest recited God's name 10 times. Other than those two exceptions, the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, is never pronounced as it is written. Now, when we refer to this special name of God, outside the context of prayer, or outside the context of actually reading the Bible, we pronounce it Adonai. Again, in those situations, when we see God's name in the Torah or in our prayer book, again, in those situations, when we see God's name in the Torah or in our prayer book, but if we're referring to God's holy name outside those contexts of prayer or reading the Bible, then we pronounce it customarily by just saying Hashem, which is Hebrew for the name. We simply refer to God's name as Hashem, the name. Now, I mentioned that there are other names of God. And you might say these are less holy, although they are holy in their own right. And these other names of God are pronounced as they are written. Again, only during prayer or only during the reading of the Torah. One of these names, for example, is Elohim. So when you're reading the Torah, when you're praying, you would be able to pronounce that name as it is written. Otherwise, what we usually do is alter it slightly, and we might say something like Elohim. One reason that God's essential name is never pronounced is based upon a verse in Exodus chapter 3, verse 15, where God says, Zeh Shmi Le'olam. This is my name for eternity. This is my name for eternity. Again, referring to the Tetragrammaton. But the oral Torah reads this verse as, Zeh Shmi Le'alem. This is my name, and it should be concealed. But the oral Torah reads this verse as, Zeh Shmi Le'alem. If you read Hebrew, you'll notice that the text of the Bible only has consonants. There are no vowels in the Torah itself. So you can easily take a word like le'olam and read it as le'alem. And so this, according to the Talmud, is one of the reasons why we don't pronounce God's name as it is written, because God commands us that his name should be concealed. Another reason that we, again, are careful about pronouncing not just this special name of God, the Tetragrammaton, but really pronouncing other names of God as well, unless necessary, is that the Torah says in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 58, you must fear this glorious and awesome name of God, your Lord. That we are supposed to treat God's name with tremendous awe and reverence. And this trepidation is based upon the third of the Ten Commandments, which states, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." Now, the most basic understanding of this verse refers to a senseless oath using God's name. But by extension, our rabbis teach that it includes all expressions of God's name, again, except for when exceptions are made according to God's instructions. So we don't use God's special name either. Again, unless it was when he specified it.
Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about the personal name for God in the Old Testament. Some of you may know this name as Yahweh, and others of you may know this name as Jehovah. Well, there's a fascinating story behind these two versions of God's name, and I want to share with you a condensed version of that story. So, first of all, you often see God's name abbreviated like this: YHWH. Why is that? Well, in the Jewish religious community, the divine name is considered so sacred that it is never pronounced. So when you want to say the sacred name, what you do is you say the word Adonai instead, which means Lord. Now this is something that reaches back thousands of years. And by the way, this is why religious Jews today often write G-D rather than God. It's kind of a nod to the sacredness of the divine name. Now, there's actually another reason why it is appropriate to write YHWH, and that is in the Hebrew Bible, as it was originally written, there were no vowels in the text. And in fact, in modern Hebrew, this is still the case. No vowels are written. Hebrew speakers are able to recognize words by the consonants alone. They differentiate between words with the same consonants by looking at the context. And we rely on context too in the English language with words like pit, which depending on the context can either mean a hole in the ground or a giant seed in the middle of a fruit. So context tells us which concept a word represents. So the Hebrew Bible, as it was originally written, did not have vowels in the text. Well, around the 8th century AD, a group of Hebrew scribes known as the Masoretes recognized that there was a problem with this. They recognized that without vowels in the text, you run the risk of having subsequent generations forget how words are supposed to be pronounced. So in order to better preserve the Hebrew Bible for future generations, they added vowels into the consonant-only text. And in order to avoid disturbing the text in any way, they added these vowels below and sometimes even above the consonants. As a result, when you read Hebrew, you read in a zigzag pattern. So what did the Masoretes do when they had to add vowels to the sacred personal name of God, the one with the consonants YHWH? Well, they didn't want to put the correct vowels in, lest the sacred name be pronounced when you're reading the text out loud. And they also wanted to honor the ancient practice of reading Adonai instead of Yahweh. Thus, what the Masoretes ended up doing is placing the vowels for the word Adonai under the consonants of the word Yahweh. By doing this, they ensured that someone who came across the divine name would remember to read Adonai and not actually pronounce the divine name. So let me show you how this works. Here's how Adonai would be written. The first symbol you see here is actually a letter in the Hebrew alphabet that has no sound. You see, in the Hebrew language, every word has to begin with a consonant. So if you want to write a word that starts with a vowel sound, you need to write this blank consonant first, and then put a vowel underneath it, so it starts with an A. Also in Hebrew, the A and the Y together produce an I sound. So this would be read Adonai. So the Masoretes took these vowels for Adonai, and then they added them underneath the consonants of the sacred name YHWH, which resulted in this word, Yehovah. Does this sound familiar at all? When we write this word in English, the Y is changed to a J, and the W is changed to a V, resulting in the word Jehovah. So let's go over that one more time. The Masoretes took the vowels from the word Adonai, that A-O-A, and placed it on the bottom of the sacred personal name for God. And when we write this in English, we get the word Jehovah. So what does this mean? Well, several things. It means that the word Jehovah is not a real word. A couple hundred years ago, when the Bible was translated from Hebrew into English, scholars were unaware of this switch in vowels, so they thought this was actually how the sacred name was written. They didn't understand that the vowels were taken from the word Adonai in order to make sure that the sacred name was not pronounced. So thus, the word Jehovah is a result of a simple mistake in translating the Hebrew Bible. Another thing that is really fascinating is that we are not even 100% sure that Yahweh is the correct pronunciation of the sacred name. After all, the correct vowels to the sacred name were never written down by the Jews anywhere. And after a while, the historical pronunciation was simply lost. So there are even some scholars who have suggested that the name was pronounced Yehu. However, the majority of linguists today agree that Yahweh is most likely the way that the sacred personal name should be pronounced.